My name is Björn Krondorfer. I'm the director of the Martin Springer Institute and professor at Northern Arizona University. In March 2020, just before the lockdown in South Africa, I opened the exhibition Through the Eyes of Youth, Life and Death in the Bedzin Ghetto at the Johannesburg Holocaust Genocide Center. Let me share with you the story of this exhibit. In September 1939, Nazi Germany invaded Poland, and German forces immediately occupied the Polish city of Bedzin, a small industrial town close to the German border. About half of the town's 54,000 Polish inhabitants were Jewish, the other Catholic. The two communities lived in relative harmony before the war. With the arrival of the Nazis, the lives of Jewish people changed forever. Young people struggled with growing up amid violence, hatred, and loss, while still trying to find small joys in life. Our exhibit, Through the Eyes of Youth, Life and Death in the Bedzin Ghetto, tells the story of young people in Bedzin during the Holocaust. Growing restrictions and random violent acts were followed by the forced resettlement of Jews into the cramped ghetto of Kamionka and the eventual deportation to the death camps of Auschwitz, only 25 miles away. Doris Springer is one of the young people who was born in Bedzin and survived. Doris was forced to work in a Nazi labor camp. After the war, she went to the United States, where she and her husband, Ralph Martin, founded the Martin Springer Institute. To honor her life, we created this exhibit with a team of university students. The stories we tell are mostly in the words of 7 young people: Doris Martin, James Lipsky, Hadassah Broder, Rutger Laskier, Sam Pivnik, and Rose Regnick, and Arnold Che. We also included the drawings of Ella Lieberman-Schieber, a young woman who, while waiting for safe passage to Israel after the war, drew pictures of Bedzin under Nazi occupation. Not everyone survived. Hadassah did not survive, nor did Rutger, but we still have fragments of their story. To send an unmistakable signal, the Nazis burned down the old majestic synagogue in the medieval center of Bedzin a few days after the occupation. Then they harassed the Jewish population, conscripted men into menial labor in town, sent young women away to labor camps, assigned Jews to live in a restricted neighborhood, and confiscated their shops. Rose Regnick remembers, "We were resettled to a 2-room apartment. All our aunts with their children moved in with us. We were 15 people living in 2 rooms. Often, young people became caretakers of their families or had to take on duties beyond their age. But the young people also wanted to live and find small joys during the 4 years of Nazi occupation and ghettoization." Jane Lipsky recalls, "Once a week, a group of half a dozen 9- and 10-year-old girls would gather in my parents' apartment, where I would read to them and teach them songs for an hour or 2. Even when Jews were forced into the overcrowded Kamionka ghetto with its ramshackle buildings, young people met at a small plot of land to plant vegetables, study, debate, dream of Zion, sing and dance, and fall in love. How wonderful it felt to experience this feeling of love, despite such clouds of doom hovering over us, writes Rose Recknick in her memoirs. Hadassah too fell in love, and she married David in 1941. They had a child in 1942. Hadassah did not survive. In 1943, she was deported to Auschwitz. Her trace disappears from the records of history. As the rate of deportations to death camps accelerated in 1943, young people began to plot resistance and went underground. No place was safe, remembers Jane Lipsky. We wanted to resist, or at least not go meekly to the crematoria. Arnold Shea recalls, resistance meant conducting underground schools to continue the teachings of Torah, or to slip out of the ghetto. And everyone knew if they were caught, it meant death. And yet, Jane will later write, Zionist youth groups continued to meet in small groups. Others were able to smuggle in small arms and create bunkers. In the end, nothing helped. During the final deportations in the fall of 1943, anyone who resisted was shot. Everyone else was sent to Auschwitz. Only a few managed to escape. Without the testimonies and memoirs of Doris, Jane, Arnold, Rose, and Sam, and without the diary of Rutka, which she had written as a young girl, though she did not survive herself, the stories of these young people would have been lost forever. 80 years later, their voices still speak to us. And they have inspired young people in Poland today to learn about their town's painful past, as it happened a few years ago when Polish students staged a recreation of the final deportation of Jews from Bedzin. Still, we cannot forget that most stories are lost because almost all Jews in Bedzin lost their lives during the Holocaust. In our exhibit, we were able to retrieve the lives of a few young people, but the loss was far greater than we can imagine. The last panel shows Rose Recknick as a small child at a big family gathering in the early 1930s in Bedzin. Her whole family disappeared. Only Rose survived.